Hello and welcome to this webinar on Digitalising Innovative Finance. My name's Zach White and I work with the Digital Utilities programme at the GSMA. I will first briefly introduce the GSMA before turning to an overview of some of the issues that we'll be talking about today. We then have an excellent lineup of speakers who we will take two at a time, and at the end of the hour, there will be a space for audience Q&A. So if you're able to add those to the comments as we go along, we'll pick them up at the end. As a whole, the GSMA is a global organisation unifying the mobile ecosystem. I work with the Mobile for Development Foundation, which for over a decade has worked at the intersection of the mobile ecosystem and the development sector. We work to stimulate digital innovation that delivers large-scale socio-economic impact. The Digital Utilities programme focuses on essential services in cities. For us, this includes energy, water, sanitation, waste management, and transport. One of the main things that we do as a foundation and as a programme is innovation funding. And that's really the departure point for us in investigating these issues. A lot of the enterprises we support go on to raise sizable follow-on funding, but many still face a lot of issues with accessing the kind of capital they need to scale, particularly missing middle investments where they've grown too large for grant funding, but are still deemed too risky for commercial investments. Last year, we published a study on this in which we reviewed the extent to which innovative financing models are integrating digital and how digital technology can really help to make those more effective. From that, we picked out 5 instruments that we saw as holding most promise for a lot of these early stage companies and startups, as well as some more mature companies. In a previous webinar, we looked at results-based finance and carbon finance, which are more towards the impact end of the scale of the sources of capital and have lower ticket sizes generally. In this webinar, we're going to be discussing revenue share models and receivables financing, and I'll briefly give an overview of each of those in turn before we turn to our panels. So a revenue share arrangement will typically begin with a financier providing funding to an entrepreneur using some form of a productive asset through a fintech platform. In turn, they will provide the services to their end customers or clients, receiving payments digitally. The revenue share element comes because at this point, a portion of those revenues are directed directly back to whoever's financing the solution, with, of course, digital enabling data on the operations to similarly flow back. I think some of the leading companies we see here are Move, Untapped, who we have on the call, and GetVantage. Revenue share is at a slightly earlier stage than receivables financing and generally has a slightly smaller ticket size. Turning to receivables financing and what this looks like. So here we begin with an enterprise providing an asset on a lease or pay-as-you-go basis to an end user, which at scale means that there are data on those repayments and that you can generate an aggregated portfolio score for those groups of end users. This in turn can be provided to a third party, known as a factor in these arrangements, which could be a local bank, who will purchase via a special purpose vehicle those flows of future payments through notes issued by the SPV. Then, as end users repay, that is taken off and repaid to whoever purchased the notes. The benefit in this situation for the enterprise is that those future receivables can be sold to enable instant access to working capital. And some of the big deals we've seen are from D-Light, Sun King, and some of the supporting organizations, Nithio and Impact. D-Light in Kenya had the Brighter Life Kenya 1 and 2 facilities. Each were over $100 million. And Sun King had a $130 million securitization deal with Citi a couple of years ago. And I'm pleased to say we have them on the call and can discuss that more. I think what's significant about those D-Light deals is earlier this year, the BLK1 deal, the senior debt was paid off in full, and it's an industry milestone that will do much to encourage further investment. That's it from me on some of the background and a very rough overview of what we're talking about today. I'd of course encourage everyone to read the full report. It's available via that QR code and that first link. In that report, we include 30 profiles of specific deals or organizations using all 5 of those mechanisms. There are also hundreds of examples to help ground the findings and direct people to where they can see some real world examples of these. We also, earlier I mentioned that webinar, that's available through that bit.ly link on screen. We also recently published a guide for startups, which provides a much reduced overview of those instruments, including some of the pros, cons, and the requirements if you wanted to pursue them. That's it from my introduction presentation. I will now carry us into the first panel, where I will be joined by Njeri Kara from Nithio and Manon Dubois from Solaris Off-Grid. So I'd invite them both to turn on their videos. Thank you very much. Jerry, I'll start with you, if I may. So Nithio use a risk analysis engine to produce those credit scores that I mentioned, particularly for off-grid companies. Could you tell us a little bit about the technology you use and the data requirement from the firms?
Yeah, so hi everyone. As you mentioned, Nithio has created a process of standardizing credit risk. So Nithio, for those not familiar, is an AI-enabled platform that drives investment to clean energy companies. The 2 main data inputs that we utilize or use. So first is from the borrower companies or potential borrower companies. So this is customer level data, so raw data, anonymized data. So it's the format is agnostic. So we have incorporated data, onboarded data from a variety of companies. And this includes account level details that are collected at point of sale, as well as all payment transaction data. So this is the first data source we collect from the company itself. The second is we utilize a rich mix of geospatial data, so both proprietary as well as open source data that provides a fairly granular view of socioeconomic indicators, demographic indicators, climate indicators, down to about the 1 square kilometer area. And so we merge these 2 data sets into kind of a master data set that we input into our analytics engine. The outputs we get is portfolio health metrics. So we are able to track key portfolio performance metrics. And the second, we're able also to predict precise customer repayment patterns and behaviors. So we're able to forecast cash flows, getting an accurate valuation of receivables, and therefore the risk levels associated with a particular investment. The goal of our assessment of receivables is not to be exclusive in our financing or in the financing that we facilitate, but it's to be able to understand the types of capital and the best deal structures that are suitable based off of the risk that we assess and the likelihood to repay. Once an investment has been made, so once we've FAIR, for example, has made an investment, we're able to track key covenant metrics, even with our analytics, and minimize risk by detecting, let's say, early warning signs before a breach even occurs. And we're also able to compute and track impact metrics. Both those aligned with industry standards, as well as those that are more contextually relevant. So in a nutshell, in summary, NIFIO uses its analytics product, 1, as a key due diligence input for our fair financing, 2, for portfolio monitoring and covenant compliance of our fair investments, 3, to track a variety of socioeconomic, environmental impact metrics, and lastly, as a service to facilitate capital deployment from other investors outside of FAIR to companies.
That's a fantastic overview. So yeah, I think there's maybe 2 elements that I'd start by asking a little bit more about. One is where you provide data services to, other investments and others making investments and perform that kind of analytics function to them. And the second is your own investment facility, FAIR. And I was wondering if you could maybe give a few examples of some of the specific either deals or companies you've worked with in deploying those solutions.
Yeah, so for FAIR, we've worked with or we've invested in 7 companies spanning 3 markets. So initially, the focus of our investments has been Nigeria, Uganda, Kenya. So, large companies, for example, M-Copper, smaller companies in Nigeria like Winnock have been some of our portfolio companies from FAIR, but our mandate has increased to go beyond those 3 markets. And so right now, our borrower pipeline spans about 20 countries. We have supported other companies as a portfolio monitoring agent for certain deals to be able to verify provide verification for certain key portfolio covenant terms, such as collection rate and the like, and also have been able to work with other organizations in their due diligence process. So, for example, Sunfunder in carrying out due diligence for potential investment deals that they are carrying out.
Thanks. And so with the kind of full spectrum of companies that you work for, what advice would you offer pay-as-you-go companies who are, thinking about setting up their systems that may provide the data needed for these types of assessments? Do you have any recommendations on where to follow and which data are absolutely critical?
Yeah, so investing in high quality data management systems for companies is really critical. So these are systems that are able to collect customer level data, but even payment transaction data. Some of the key data inputs that we found are really useful is particular demographic data like gender. So if you think about gender impacts, a lot of that, can be tied to an organization collecting data on the gender of end users or households that they're providing their products to. Geolocation is a critical data point as well. So collecting geolocation information. We are able to work with a wide variety of companies that either collect like regional level data, but we found those ones that can specifically provide, GPS coordinates for their systems or where their sales have been made, are then more useful even with the other data that we kind of tag into and use for our modeling and outputs. And so we are able to provide clearer, more targeted insights, the better the quality of the data is. So both for the own companies, business operations, as well as to be able to increase the bankability of companies, I think investing in that high quality data management systems and collecting those critical data points is important.
Fantastic. One final question before I turn to Manon. So NIFIO has its own investment facility. I was wondering, what's your experience been with engaging or raising funds from those who are putting money in or DFIs, and how the analytics you have support that? So any feedback between the work you do on the analytics side and the fundraising side for yourself?
Yeah, so as I've mentioned, with the investment vehicle we have, FAIR, we've been successful in raising funds from really a broad range of investors, and analytics has been a key driver to that success. Analytics helps us assess credit risk for companies that provide various products, are at different stages of growth, are at different locations. And some of these even are particularly smaller local distributors that would be difficult for other investors to be able to invest in because of perhaps the small ticket size, the high cost of their transactions, and even the perceived risks of these transactions. So with the insights on risk, on credit risk that we're able to provide with our risk analytics, FAIR is able to provide that assessment, accurate assessment, even through the due diligence process and channel this commercial financing. And so in line with using FAIR to support other investors to invest in smaller companies, and also, as has been mentioned, using analytics kind of as a standalone product outside of FAIR, even to inform direct investments from other investors.
That's great. Thank you so much, Sherry. If you're able to stay on the line in case we have any questions on your work specifically coming through the chat now.
Sure.
But Manon, I'd like to turn to you and your experience now. I think I'll prime it in the off-grid space, we're talking about receivables more than revenue share often. I think the receivables deals that we've seen in the sector are huge, and that's because they carry very large transaction costs. They require a lot of data to put them in, a lot of data inputs and a lot of contractual negotiations. And there's also only a few examples within the sector so far. But of course, your work focuses on addressing the gap for smaller companies to access receivables financing. So I was wondering if you could introduce your work and give us an overview of that challenge and what you're aiming to do.
Thank you, Zach. You're right. We know today that PayGo is our best bet to offer universal access to energy, but we also know that we need both the large scale-ups and the small and medium-sized distributors to reach the entire market. Unfortunately, you've said it, what we see today is that the small companies have reduced access to proper financing. They mostly get financed through debt, which creates a liquidity mismatch and exacerbates cash flow imbalances when it's on balance sheet debts, and at least in its traditional form. And from that perspective, receivable financing is a great solution to scale without those cash flow pressures when you're looking for working capital. Unfortunately, today, as you're saying, receivable financing has been concentrated on companies that have $1 million worth of receivable in their books, of which there are not many. The reason why we're maybe not going to go into detail of all the challenges, and you've mentioned some, to make receivable financing happen, you need a good recipe, you need solid receivables data, you need robust legal frameworks and off-balance sheet entities, and you need solid backup servicing. And these elements today are not widely available, or they are available at high cost. And when you have high cost, you need high ticket sizes to amortize those costs in the first place. So what are we trying to do with bridging here? We've remained true to Solaris Off-Grid's historic positioning of credit delivery enabler. We have not created a fund, we have rather created a tool, an enabling marketplace that aims to both facilitate and standardize technical and legal aspects of receivables financing transactions. So we do that through three main pillars mostly: standardizing receivables data through direct CRM integration with companies and automated data retrieval, creating standard legal agreements and reusable off-balance sheet entities that will spare investors the need to create ad hoc SPV for each deal, which drastically increase transaction costs usually, and technical backup servicing to maintain continuity of collection in case of distributors default and reduce risk. So that bridges the gap in two ways. First, by providing the turnkey solutions, we manage to bring down transaction cost, and that way we lower the ticket size necessary for investors to consider a deal in the first place. And second, and I think we will talk about that a little bit more later, by standardizing investment data and by standardizing legal processes, we pave the way for financial aggregation, where instead of purchasing $2 million worth of receivables from one medium company, an investor can come and say he's going to purchase $200K worth of receivables from 10 smaller ones with similar transaction costs.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So maybe I could just probe a little bit further in terms of, I mean, the solution is great. The necessity is clear. How has it worked in practice so far? And, you know, what sort of uptake have you seen, and what sort of challenges have you faced?
Yeah. So the challenges we've seen, there are several challenges we've encountered. Definitely a challenge on the legal side, legal aspects of balance sheet at large. And I think no one will say the opposite on this during this session. Legal aspects of aggregation and of balance sheet are complex and they are costly. So it has definitely been a challenge to navigate for us when building our legal infrastructure. And it is a challenge any investor or company willing to do off balance sheet will run into. However, we've also seen this as an opportunity to bring capital to the space more smartly. Because since we have invested in this reusable kind of legal as a service infrastructure, we can then offer it as a legal solutions to several investors and several companies willing to do a balance sheet and amortize those costs among several deals, instead of having to start from scratch on every deal, which creates quite a lot of capital inertia at the industry level. So that's definitely been one of the challenge. Another one has been on backup servicing. Without a backup servicer, so without a relay in case of company's default, you are not effectively dissociating asset and company risk because you are completely exposed as an investor to the risk of default of the primary servicer, in all cases, the distributor of energy whose receivables have been purchased. So the technical design of backup servicing from all perspective has not been an issue. We've been building on our experience running PayGops for 8 years to create solutions that will help maintain continuity of payment, token generation, and software access if a company defaults. The challenge has been rather on tailoring these solutions to what the industry really wants and to really understanding what is the need, because you have several approaches and risk mitigation level with backup servicing. And currently, we are not yet at a point where the industry has a shared vision on what backup servicing should do and what are kind of the gold standards and what you should go for. So that has been a bit of a challenge to navigate in the discussion we've had. Hopefully, it's a discussion that is taking place and we are moving forward collectively, which is really necessary to give clarity to investor, companies, and backup service provider in the space, both from a financial perspective and an impact level. Because when you do receivable financing, bottom line, you want to bring credit to the end customer in the field, and you need a solution to make sure that this customer will have continued access to energy if his provider default. And a very last point, and I will stop there. The last challenge, I mean, there might be others if we dig, but another challenge we've seen is building partnership with investors to help them fast-tracking the development of receivable purchasing facilities has been a bit complicated at first. Hopefully now we've moved forward and lots of progresses have been made here, but it's quite new. Our positioning is quite new. It's new for investment manager to work in such partnerships. So communicating or positioning as complementary and not necessarily competitive has not always been easy. And that is reinforced by the fact that some great fintechs, such as Nithio, for instance, are tackling the same bottlenecks, but have built their own funds. And it has not really been our positioning because, again, as I said, we wanted to remain true to our position of enabler. So we've always wanted to work with existing investors and to leverage their market and analytical knowledge rather than building our own investment capacity in-house, which would have been a duplicate of resources. So navigating that has also been a bit of a challenge initially, but I think that now we're getting a better collective awareness of what each stakeholder is doing in the space. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you so much. I think there's more to pick up there, but maybe at the top of the hour when we return to the open Q&A, we can revisit some of those because we're going to move very shortly to the next panel. But I think really interesting points, about the risks associated with the companies and particularly smaller companies and how to manage this, and then the positioning of platforms and fintech players versus investors, whether it's an as a service offering or whether it's in-house as part of an investment vehicle. Yeah, interesting question on the technology side of things. I should have said I skipped over it, but this first panel was really focusing on the technology and data side. We have two more mini panels coming up, which I will hand over for my colleague George Kibala-Bauer to lead. First, he's going to be joined by three investors, which I'll allow him to introduce. We'll then turn to a panel with a couple of startups from companies that are pursuing some of these deals or the scale-up financing. But I'll hand over now to my colleague, George, and thank you, Manon and Jerry, for your contributions. Very good to have you here. And yeah, see you again on the top of the hour for any audience Q&A there might be. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Zach, and thanks a lot to Jerry and Manon for sharing your great insights. I'm really looking forward to building on some of those for this next component of the discussion. So as Zach mentioned, I'll be joined first by a group of funders that are actively involved in some of these financing arrangements we've covered in Zach's presentation. So first there'll be Jim from Untapped, David from GreenMax Capital, and Haberjan from Credible, really covering a lot of interesting sectors and geographies with their work. First, a bit about myself. I work with Zach in the GSMA Digital Utilities program and worked as a director based in London. And yeah, I've worked with Zach on this report, and really excited to dive into some of the perspectives from you as funders in this part of the conversation. Just to get us started, maybe I'll go to Jim first, because I know Jim best among the panelists, and we've kind of bounced off on the subject for quite some time. So I'll put you on the spot first, Jim. And I wanted to kind of reflect on a recent blog post that I read from you, in which you kind of look at that venture capital in Africa kind of works really well for asset light, hyper growth businesses, but it doesn't really fit the needs for a lot of businesses in Africa, which are asset or equipment heavy and don't have the same exponential growth potential that's sometimes associated with the VC Silicon Valley model. So in that context, can you tell us a bit about your kind of business model at Untapped, the revenue share financing model, and how it's addressing this gap left by traditional VC in Africa?
Yeah, thanks for the intro, George. And it was interesting listening to Jerry and Manon, because there's many similarities, obviously, in what they do in our approach. But I think you touched on it fundamentally. I think the most common investment models are available. In fact, the one that I started with, both on the credit side as well as a venture investor, they leave out, or they miss, I think, a substantial opportunity of companies that are perhaps not hyper growth, but are strong cash flow generating businesses, and that simply need growth capital in order to scale. But because of the existing investment models that are available, i.e. venture that is really focused on hyperscale asset-light companies, and commercial debt that really only finances companies that are much further along, there is a value of debt that many people fall into. And so our business is really focused on how do we take the data and the digital payments infrastructure that these companies have built and use that to help bridge the gap from early stage startup, grow those companies out to be more bankable by more traditional investors.
And just as a follow-up question on that, Jim, are there particular sectors that you think have a particular good potential for this kind of revenue share model? Are there sectors you think have an opportunity for that? Yeah.
So let me give you the short answer, and I'd love to go a little bit deeper. So the short answer is we think mobility of all kinds, two-wheelers, four-wheelers, trucks, even little scooters like the one that my phone is sitting on right now. Those are all great types of assets, as are POS devices. Anything that really produces data is a productive asset and is operated by or run with digital payments. Let me give you a slightly deeper answer, which I think again relates back to the comments from Njeri and Manon. What we're essentially doing is choosing assets that generate these predictable streams of data and relatively predictable behavior based on past performance. And so what we're essentially doing when we provide financing to a electric mobility or electric motorcycle company, for example, we're saying the first 1,000 motorcycles that you are deploying and monitoring, the next 2,000 will likely be very similar. And so once we have captured the data flows from you, we can actually provide the future financing on those motorcycles. So in that sense, our financing model becomes much more like future flow financing or future receivables financing, because we have that data and we have the ability to capture the repayments through the mobile systems. So again, we're focused on mobility. We like POS devices. We like things such as pay-as-you-go systems of all kinds. But ultimately, if a company is producing high-quality data and is capturing its customer payments through digital platforms that we can integrate with, those companies are all good candidates for our financing.
Thanks a lot, Jim. That's a great answer. I'm going to come back to you, but first I wanted to get our other panelists a chance to speak. David, great to have you here. You represent GreenMax Capital, and GreenMax Capital has been, advising funders and managing fund structures in the off-grid solar sector for quite some time now. So I just wanted to get your perspective a bit about the evolution of the financing of solar companies that you've been able to witness over the last couple of years working in the space, and what some of your reflections are.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you, George. A lot of what we are seeing, the financing solution we are seeing, some of the players are around. Over the past years, in the off-grid space, we have seen an increased interest on off-balance sheet solutions, whether through securitization or other form of financing solution that are enabling paygo company to receive financing using the receivable or directly as using the receivable as a collateral for financing. So that's has been a growing trend that we are witnessing. Also compared to the beginning of the sector, what we are seeing more and more is the need for local currency financing. The off-grid space grew and scaled up really quickly, but it was on the back of foreign currency denominated, and with the negative evaluation and depreciation of currency, although local currency remains comparatively a bit more expensive and less affordable than foreign currency denominated, even from the players, they are more and more willing to get local currency financing, which at the beginning of the industry, it was a quick comparison. Oh, why would I pay 10 or 15% in local currency if I can get 5 to 6% in US dollars? Now we are seeing players who are interested in having transaction advisory support to raise local currency through commercial bank or local player through receivable financing, local currency or other form of financing. And what is striking also as well is the number of alternative lenders. We are interested at GreenMax, we are interested in the mobility space. So we came across the name of Untap with a few of our clients. Revenue sharing
Hopefully just the
model.
good ones.
Yeah, good ones. Still the debate on, maybe it's expensive, but it's a local currency and you are helping them. So good ones all of the time, all right? We are seeing alternative lenders. We see even commercial banks venturing in using more and more digital data, using some of them are using mobile money to come up with credit assessment and testing. At this stage is few players are testing, but when we are talking to commercial banks, a lot of them are interested and are asking us, what are you seeing on the market when we are talking about what Nitio does using data, what other funders are doing using data. They are willing to listen and some of them are going even further, building small portfolios as pilot, only based on credit assessment using digital data, mobile money data, alternative way of assessing. So those are the trends that we have seen over the past 2 years in the sector.
Thanks a lot, David. Those are really great insights, and I'm reflecting a bit about the importance of local currency financing and some of the trends we've seen around outlending. It definitely resonates a lot with some of the findings we shared in our report as well. So thanks a lot for pointing out those. I just wanted to follow up on the point on local currency financing, because I know that's a big topic for you as well. And I've heard you speak before at conferences about the importance of bridging the gap between like traditional commercial banks and the off-grid solar sector. So could you talk a bit about how the data that's generated by the off-grid solar sector, especially the PAYGO side, can help also bring in traditional local banks that obviously collectively have quite large balance sheets to potentially support the sector into the fold?
Yeah, and that's what we are trying to accomplish with one of our vehicle. It's really crowding in local commercial bank in the space because they have cheaper source of capital, and it's in local currency. But at the same time, those commercial banks, they are risk averse. The business model was not centered around financing small businesses. It was really based financing corporates. So the asymmetry of information, the new technology, new players, new business models, everything leads to it's more risky. So the way we are trying to help them in a building portfolio, it's really by creating an ecosystem whereby the ultimate goal is to decouple financing and distribution. And the way we do it, we partner, we create partnership with financial institutions and off-grid companies. And at the heart of that partnership, we conduct a due diligence to understand historical data. on the quality of the portfolio. Because when we are going to a financing partner, we need to demonstrate, although you believe the segment that they are serving are too risky, historical data are showing that it's not that risky. And that's how we are using data that has been built by the industry over the years to show historical performance. And once we have to further provide an incentive to those commercial banks, we offer risk mitigation instrument in the form of first loss guarantee to insulate up to 20% of a given portfolio, such that they can at least venture with having the comfort that we will not lose our capital in this new important segment, but we will not lose our capital. So risk mitigation could be in the form of first loss coverage. It could be in the form of subordinated junior concessional position in a portfolio that we build together, where we will lose our money first before they lose theirs. That's the value proposition. And by doing that, we are trying to crowd in and to unlock that massive amount of capital that commercial banks have on the continent to support not necessarily working capital, but to create consumer finance, consumer lending. So in our ideal partnership, the vendor who has been providing solution through payroll model will remain only with origination or maintenance and eventually repossession if there are claims on the portfolio. And the bank will provide the financing directly to an end user who is willing to buy, for example, an electric motorbike from a designated vendor, and an electric motorbike is quite expensive. Now we will match that vendor to a financial institution willing to provide the financing directly to the rider, not as working capital or inventory for the delivery company. So those are the type of solution that we are working around to unlock more financing for end user, which translates to being off balance sheet at the end for the off-grid solar companies.
Thanks a lot, David. Really fascinating, and also speaks to the importance of thinking through, which financing structures can enable the right mix of risk for different types of stakeholders that obviously have different objectives and different risk return requirements. I'm gonna come back to you, David, and also Jim, but I wanted to give Habajan the chance to also come in to the discussion. Obviously, Credible has seen phenomenal growth over the past couple of years and has become one of Asia's largest working capital focused fintechs with more than $6 billion provided annually. Can you outline a bit your product offering and the key ways in which your product is using digital tools also to provide that finance?
Thank you, George, for introducing us. And before I start, I will like to highlight the point that Jim said during his words, that data of past is a key enabler to understand the future cash flows that are coming. Okay, we primarily are working on a similar thought process. We are primarily a working capital enabler. We have technology. We work as a technology service providers to big banks within India, outside India, and Southeast Asia. And we also have our own company through which we fund through our own books. While doing all of this, the idea is primarily how can we use the technology that we have, the data that is available within the ecosystem, to do supply chain financing across the value chain, whether it is on the vendor side, whether it is on the dealer side, whether it is pre-shipment, post-shipment, or any other kind of instrument that can be used to give a comfort to the vendor. While we are doing that, we also think of using the data pools that are available to come up with a tech solution which can help uh, do a deep level financing or deep tier financing in some sense. So we have come up with solutions like tokenization, where a comfort through an anchor, while it was at level 1 of a vendor or a distributor, through tokenization it can be distributed to level 2 and level 3. Okay, so we are primarily uh, pride ourselves in terms of how we synthesize the data that is available either through within the bank statement, through transactions, through the payments that is happening, or through connectors that we have built, which connects into the ERPs of the various businesses and pull out data from them after consent. And then we triangulate all of that to come up with metrics which a lender can use to take a decision which he was not able to take before. And along with this, we do have our own platforms where complete transaction can be done on a click of a button, right from uploading the relevant instrument invoices, POs, and then banks doing it a complete green journey or
Thanks a lot, Harbhajan. And just as a follow-up on that, obviously we've seen a huge uptake in digital payments in India over the last decade as well. And I was just wanted to reflect what impact that has had on the on your business model specifically, because obviously your model, especially on SME working capital financing, relies heavily on understanding the cash flow of some of these enterprises. And yeah, what role has the digitization of the payment landscape in India through things like UPI shaped your ability to analyze those cash flows? And yeah, how do you acquire the kind of cash flow data in general, and then come up with your assessment?
yeah. I understand where this question is coming from, and the ecosystem has changed drastically within India in the last couple of years, thanks to the initiatives that government has taken. Uh, See, for companies like us, or even the financier to underwrite any kind of business, they need data on which they can underwrite and take the risk. Now, with UPI coming in, with GST, the transaction data pool that India has built, or the account aggregator system that India has built, what has happened is the digital footprints of these small businesses has increased many folds. And when this digital footprints are increasing at each stage of the business that they're doing, those nodal points or the data points can be used by technology service providers like us to bring in inferences that are very useful. So, to answer your question, with the huge amount of data that is now available in a structured format, we have created a layer which can connect these APIs available in these ecosystems, and then bring in all that to underwriting platform, to the transaction platform, so that the turnaround time of underwriting, the monitoring that can happen, even coming up with innovative models of revenue-based financing, or linking all of those future payments that are coming in into the repayments that are supposed to be done to the lender. All of that is possible because of the digital footprint that has been expanded within India.
Thanks. That's really interesting. And Jim, I think you wanted to come in on that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
just adding to that, I think two things. One is that just seconding what um, I'm sorry, I can't pronounce your name.
Harbhajan.
Harbhajan, thank you. I don't want to embarrass myself and mispronounce your name. What Harbhajan was just saying, in the sense of the digital footprint of the smaller businesses expanding, and the universal payment infrastructure that India has built, that's obviously provided a lot of financial information. But I think equally important, if not even more insightful, is the increasing amount of operational data that's becoming important. What I mean by operational data, it isn't just how much did I pay, but how much did I pay for what? Or let's say in the case of an electric motorcycle, where did it go? How many kilometers did it drive? How many kilowatt hours did the battery use? How many battery swaps were done in the last, on average per motorcycle per day? Those operational metrics become incredibly insightful into the health of the business. And so, yes, the top line is always important, and digital infrastructure like UBI in India, but also the emerging digital payment platforms across Africa and Latin America, those are extremely useful to get financial data. But the operational data gets us an additional layer of intelligence that gives us an additional layer of safety because it allows us to predict the health of the business.
Great segue, Jim, because I was just about to ask you what some of the key data points and considerations are when you're making an investment in the company, and this operational data, obviously really key. And obviously digital payment data is often like a hot topic, but obviously there's a lot of key operational data that can also come from other digital technologies around asset tracking, as you mentioned, in the sort of e-mobility space. I guess just a follow-up question to you would be, Jim, in terms of what do you see as being some of the barriers for revenue share financing, particularly in Africa? Like, what, as somebody who's been working in this space for quite some time, what have been some of the barriers you've encountered in terms of scaling the model to more businesses and attracting more financing into it?
Yeah, can I just go back to your original question just briefly to add on to what I just said? So operational data, but I think the what we looked at, in addition to all the typical things that George or David and Abraj and other investors would look at, it's looking at how much additional insight the extra data can provide specifically in terms of risk management. Right, data can tell us a lot of things, and operational data can tell us a lot of things. But we try to ferret out, depending on each company's operating systems and operating data, what additional intelligence can help us mitigate the risk of giving them more money. How predictive can it be? But the second piece of that is what we've built is a technology platform that can take in data from many different types of companies. So Manon and Jerry were great at describing how their businesses worked, applied very specifically to off-grid solar. And so we want to apply that same approach to any asset that has the data stream and the digital payment stream. So, put simply, to answer your question, data, financial data, operational data is important, but so is the ability of that company and that asset type to scale in a very predictable way. So those are really important factors with us. And just adding to my previous comment. Going to your second question about, what was your second question again? The barriers
you might see in terms of scaling the model further.
Yeah. So I think one of the challenges that we're all doing, and I think some of the things that Manon and Jerry addressed as well, is how do you turn this investment model into something that is more conventional looking or is more acceptable to a traditional investor? Because this is a new way of investing. And so I'll just give you an example. If you classify RBF into debt, then one of the first questions you'll get from an investor is, okay, what's your recourse? And you can explain to that investor how the digital payments can mitigate the risk of non-payment and act as a recourse mechanism. But what they might be looking for is the legal perfection for recourse that they're familiar with in a structured finance setting. So how do you recreate that? As we say, the worst business model is trying to change everyone's behavior. That's certainly in the consumer context. But in an investor setting, it's not that dissimilar, right? If you ask them, think about the world differently, that's a hard hill to climb. So a part of our job, I think, is to take RBF and all the benefits of RBF, the fact that we can collect digital payments in advance and so on, and put it in a structure or a package, like Manon has done, what Solaris has done in terms of securitization of their portfolios, and how Jerry has done, and how everybody else on this call has done different things. How do you make it look like a typical instrument? Oh, this is just a fund, in terms of what Nityo is doing. Oh, this is just a secured vehicle or a secured receivables financing deal. How do you make it look like that as much as you can while dealing with the complexities of a slightly alternative model? Did I answer your question?
Absolutely. I think this is really useful, and it builds on some of the points also Manon made about sort of the legal structures, the importance of that. And I really liked your point about it being maybe a bit too ambitious to try to make a whole set of investors that are facing, unique set of ways of working, but also legal imperatives to just see the world differently, but actually thinking about how do we manage our product offering in a way that actually understands that understands those constraints and
if I could just make one additional point here, and again, it was mentioned, but I just want to kind of put a highlight on it, which is, we are, all of us here are investing in emerging markets, and we know, especially the ones like David who are investing in Africa, there's quite a bit of conservatism, and there's quite a bit of there's certainly a scarcity of capital. And so this bridge role that we're playing of converting it into what DFIs expect, or what an impact investor expects, is very important, just like what Manon and Nityo are doing. But I also think there is a interesting untapped opportunity that is in front of us, which is there is a revolution going on in developed markets, mostly in the US, at least from the studies that I've seen. I'm sure it's happening also in Europe, which is a trend towards capital flowing to embedded finance, data-driven financing. There's an incredible study by Bain Consulting from late 2022 that looked at the embedded data-driven finance market in the United States. And the numbers are staggering. That it's already big, as of I think 2021, already $7 billion flowing into that space, and it's almost doubling every year. And so I think the opportunity for us, that I think is a long shot opportunity, but if we get there, it's really interesting, is if we can take, which is essentially embedded data-driven forward flow financing in emerging markets, and connect that demand to the stuff that's already happening in North America, the funders that are already convinced about forward flow data-driven embedded financing, we can tap into fresh capital that is so critical to making, to helping Africa and other emerging markets leapfrog or catch up to more developed markets in terms of access to capital.
That's great. I also like the fact that Untapped keeps on coming up with untapped opportunities. So I'm really looking forward to learning more about that, and also checking out the report by Bain. I had a question for David, but I see Haberjan has his hand raised. Maybe you can come in, and then I'm going to go to David for one last question before we have to move on to the next component of the discussion. Yeah.
Yeah. Just a bit to add on the embedded finance that Jim mentioned. I think embedded finance is primarily changing how the ecosystem works. Instead of a predefined product that was first, where a product was created and then it was sold to required customers, it's going the other way around, where you are already integrated into their ecosystem, and basis data, you come up with a product which is more relevant to that customer. And that is driving the future of demand in some sense, and giving a lot of comfort in terms of the uptake that we want. So it's quite interesting how the dynamics has changed, and it's flipped from a specific product to something which is more customer centric in future.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot for those perspectives as well. David, just one final question I had for you was, you're, as a fund manager, you're often managing fund structures which unite a lot of different players together that have different some are more impact focused, some are more commercially focused. They could include donors, DFIs, and so on. Can you talk a bit about the importance of bringing these different funders with different, risk return appetites together and really creating, blended financing vehicles that are able to optimize the role of these different players? And yeah, what have you seen sort of working in your experience on that?
Yes, blended finance, it's critical in this space, because we need to have vehicles that are those foundation donors, to some extent GFIs, they have a critical role to play, and the catalytic role is definitely important in a space where you need to come up with innovative solutions to address the issues that we are facing. Otherwise, we will never address them. And what else than catalytic capital to play that role, to take that risk, because at the end of the road there's impact. So that catalytic role, it's critical. And the second aspect of blending structure is affordability of financing at the end of the day. We are advisor and fund manager. So when we have clients, they need capital, but they need that capital to be rightly priced, affordable. And only when you can use pooling investor with different risk profile, that's where you can use those who are willing at most to preserve the capital, blend them with more commercial capital, which is also the larger pool of capital, to come up and try those innovative ideas. We are seeing those models in all of the vehicle that you have presented. Nifio has used blended capital to start piloting the project. We are doing the same because at the beginning, to make that demonstration effect, you need to have affordable patient capital and people who are not willing we are not afraid of losing the capital if at the end of the road there's a massive impact. And that's what is happening in the off-grid space in general, in e-mobility as well. But if we go to pure commercial capital at the beginning of the day, we'll have maybe not the same amount of capital, or it will be quite expensive for new businesses who are fighting for tiny margins. So blended finance, it's definitely critical for the development of the sector. I wanted to just highlight on the digital and data-driven. What we tend to, I want to insist on the fact that data is removing or reducing the risk linked to asymmetry of information. As a fund manager in an informal economy, I cannot rely on payslip, I cannot rely on audited financial statement, but if I have a mean of relying on an independent source that provide me for a given potential borrower access to how much they spend, where they spend it, how much revenue they collect through the mobile money, I can comfortably assess or model revenue, and from that revenue, I can comfortably decide whether I want to lend or not. So that asymmetry of the information that data plays in reducing, it's equally important in unlocking further capital in developing economies.
Thanks a lot, David. Those are really important points, and I'm sad I have to move on to the next component of the discussion because I could keep this conversation going for another couple of hours. But we need to move on to our next speakers. Maybe there'll be some questions for you at the very end during the Q&A. But thanks so much, David, Harberjan, and Jim as well for providing us with your great insights. And yeah, also if you're in the audience and would like to learn more about their work, please reach out to them directly as well. So thanks a lot, David and Harberjan. Next up, we'll hear a bit more from companies themselves that are working in off-grid solar and e-mobility and how they've been using these innovative financing mechanisms in order to scale. So I'm really glad to be joined by Krishna from Sun King and Jonathan from Basigo. Krishna is the CFO of Sun King, and Jonathan is also the CFO and co-founder of Basigo. So I'm really looking forward to diving deeper into this topic of financing. So maybe first up, I'll put you on the spot first, Krishna, just because Sun King in 2023, went through this really large, over $130 million securitization deal, and you must have led the company through a lot of the negotiations and preparations that went into that deal. So this is a deal that was arranged by Citi, but also involved a number of banks and DFIs like BII and North Fund. Could you tell us a bit about your experience when it comes to that deal, but also why off-balance sheet financing through this receivables financing structure was such a useful tool for PayGo business like Sun King, and what made the arrangement special?
Thank you, George. There are three components to your question, right? One, why does it work for PayGo? Why securitization for PayGo? And what was our own experience? And the third one was what's special about this deal. On the first point, why securitization is good for PayGo. If you look into history, securitization is a pretty old instrument. In fact, it has a history of more than 150 years. The first kind of securitization instrument, though it was not called securitization at that point of time, was done in 1850s when railroads were being built in US. So it's a pretty old instrument. It works wherever you have a large portfolio of receivables or customers making payments, and you want to release capital and then get upfront cash. So it's almost like tailor-made for PayGo business, because that's exactly what we do. We provide energy access to customers, and customers pay for that over a period of time, which means our own capital, both equity and debt, is locked into that. And unless we release that capital, you will not be able to fund your next round of growth. So securitization helps us arrange capital at the outset, release capital from your customers immediately. It deleverages your balance sheet. It helps you grow quicker and faster. Other ancillary benefits, it's scalable. It's probably over a slightly longer period of time becomes cheaper, because you then have demonstrated a pattern of reliable and scalable cash flows. So it also becomes cheaper. Upfront cost is high, definitely, but over a period of time, the cost will fall down. So all these advantages work itself and make it very, very apt for PayGo businesses like ours. The second one, what is so special about the deal is, one, it was pretty large, one of the first of its kind, sustainability linked, full local currency securitization led by commercial banks, and almost 50% of the investment is from commercial banks. So not only in Kenya, but even larger sub-Saharan African region outside of South Africa, this is one of the largest local currency denominated commercial bank led securitization deal. So those are the unique aspects for this transaction. Our own experience, I think from start to end, the deal took around about 12 months to complete. And just yesterday, we celebrated the first anniversary of signing the deal. So we did it last year, this month. And it took us almost a year to complete that. And then you'll be surprised to know that in those 12 months, the negotiation part was hardly less than 3 months. More than 8 months was educating the investors about the structure. Think about it. A structure which is 150 years old still needs eight months of education for investors to get them, to convince them to invest in the structure, which is a 150-year-old structure. So it's old. It's found in so many countries and so many industries, but then getting investors to understand that model and invest is still a struggle. It is still a big task requiring effort, time, and obviously cost as well.
Thanks a lot, Krishna. This is super interesting. I think just on the last point, I'd like to just dive a bit deeper, because I think this is particularly interesting for other companies that are potentially also looking at this financing instrument. So when you talked about the need to educate investors, was it mainly on the financing arrangement side, or was it also just general education about making such a deal in the context of a pay-as-you-go business like Sun King? And is there any other advice you would give to companies that would like to sort of emulate such a deal in their context, or something you wish you knew before you worked on it with your investors and partners?
The first one about what was the need for the education? I think, as you rightly pointed out, it was not so much about explaining what securitization is. I think almost everybody in the field of finance knows, at least theoretically, what is securitization, how is it supposed to work. But fine-tuning or tailoring that securitization structure for a pay-go industry and making people understand that, look, this is my cash flow profile, this is how it is appropriate for securitization, this is how we will enforce all the bells and whistles or safeguards that are associated with securitization in a pay-go context. That becomes very, very important, and that is what was took a lot of time. So educating investors, and at the same time, to be honest, it was an education for us as well, because there'll be so many aspects that that come up as we start implementing it, as we tailor that. So you need to go back to your drawing board, to create a solution, and then come back and convince investors. So the second part of the question, what does it what would I would have loved to know before we started it? I think certain aspects we could have probably learned a little more or thought about a little more when we're tailoring this. Maybe instead of taking 8 months of education, it might have been done in 6 months or 4 months. We don't know. Retrospect is always a perfect vision, but it doesn't work that way. Now, to what should probably somebody interested to do the securitization should know about is, obviously, securitization is a scale business. So unless you have a scale of portfolio and operations, I would probably not advise companies to think about securitization unless they are working with preset platforms like what Solaris is trying to do or Nithyo is trying to do. So unless you're working with a platform aggregator, if you want to do a private deal or a individual deal, it won't work unless you are a sizable portfolio. 2 reasons. One, it has its own operational complexity. The time and effort that you want to put in is not justified for smaller portfolios. And second, more importantly, securitization is a costly hobby. So you will end up spending a lot of money putting it around for the first time, where the benefits will come over an extended period of time. So unless you can commit that amount of capital, it's not advisable. The second point to be taken care of is, obviously, given that it is a large transaction and structurally complex transaction, you need to have a certain level of sophistication and complex or ability to handle complexity. You should have invested in enough data analytics on your side, know your portfolio, know your cash flow really well, and have the ability to report that in a very reliable manner to investors on a regular basis. So investment into your internal systems, ability to handle complex reporting requirements, that's again is a very, very important prerequisite to doing securitization.
Thanks a lot, Krishna. This is super useful. I'll come back to you at the end, but I wanted to ask Jonathan also a couple of questions from an e-mobility perspective. We heard some of the funders on the previous panel mentioning that that's a sector that's very much of interest to them as well. And obviously, we've seen quite a bit of growth and new announcements, particularly in East Africa around e-mobility. So really looking forward to hearing your perspective. So Basigo obviously operates a pay-as-you-drive model for buses. Can you tell us a bit more about just your general business model and your approach to leasing to bus operators?
Yeah, just unmuting. Yeah, hey everyone, and thanks George for having me. Yeah, I guess a bit of kind of background about why we're excited about buses and why we choose leases here in East Africa. You know, we estimate there are about 1 million buses operating in Africa. In total, they're emitting about 1 gigaton of CO2 every year and are spending about $20 billion on asset purchase, fuel, and maintenance annually. And while, you know, the electric buses typically cost about 2 times as much upfront as the conventional ICE buses, their operating costs are about a fifth of what their ICE comparables are. And this kind of really kind of comes to play in like high mileage applications like public transport. You can actually end up with, you know, a total cost of ownership for an electric vehicle being less than the ICE. And this is kind of what Basigo's business model is designed to kind of accelerate the transition towards. And why we've done this through a lease. Basically, what we do with pay-as-you-drive is that we eliminate the high upfront vehicle acquisition cost and simply get paid very, very similar to kind of pay-as-you-go solar, a mileage-based operational lease fee that still allows bus operators to actually benefit from improved cash flows of using an EV relative to an ICE vehicle. And so what pay-as-you-drive is basically it's an in-house software management platform that we built. You know, so we just use off-the-shelf, tailored off-the-shelf, you know, Chinese e-bus technology. So we're not a bus manufacturer. We kind of see ourselves as more of a financing and infrastructure platform. But our software platform allows customers to kind of see the performance of their bus, their fleet. They can generate P&Ls and even benchmark their drivers and their buses against other fleets in Nairobi to kind of understand their operations in ways they haven't done so before. For Basigo, the platform, in particular, kind of using payment profiles as well as data from the vehicles is that we can then kind of really understand how our leases are performing, how the assets are performing, and what that kind of looks on a, you know, assets level, portfolio level, as well as customer level too. And finally, kind of we also have kind of a back end for our investors. They can actually also see kind of high fidelity data on any kind of assets that they've financed, in addition to the impact data. And I think where this is kind of going is we're an early stage company. So, you know, a lot of the systems that we're looking to build kind of really help interpret our data and use it to accelerate, you know, capital raising effectively, is also, I think, going to really help with improving the commuting experience for many. So our buses, for example, have CCTV as standard. We have digital fare collection. And through the data that we can collect, we can start doing, you know, a lot of route optimization and fleet management, which will hopefully make, you know, commuting better for everyone in East Africa.
Great, thanks a lot, Jonathan. And just a follow-up question, just because it highlights some of your personal journey as well, having had a background in off-grid solar as well. Could you tell us a bit about some of the, obviously off-grid solar and e-mobility are distinct sectors, but there are also some similarities. So could you tell us a bit about some of the important similarities and differences between, you know, e-mobility and off-grid solar, and how you've been able to bring some of the lessons from the off-grid solar sector to the e-mobility space as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think speaking a bit about my history is that before I joined Basigo, I worked at Phoenix, so another off-grid solar company that was acquired by Engie in 2018. And prior to that, I actually worked with other private sector companies and NGOs, generally looking to accelerate the adoption of technologies at that nexus of poverty and climate change. And I think in this aspect, you know, off-grid solar, EVs, and even things like agricultural inputs and cook stoves are all very similar. These technologies have high social and environmental benefits for the end user and also the community. They commonly have long-term economic benefits, but if the populations who you want to use those devices need to have any kind of radical behavior change, or have some kind of large high upfront cost, then you can kind of pretty much kneecap your adoption rates. And so I think both what Paygo Solar has tried to do is what we do with Pay As You Drive. So I guess that's one thing we've ripped off from the sector is the Pay As You. What we have in common is that we kind of both look to kind of solve these barriers to adoption by providing appropriate technology to these populations with finance solutions to accelerate their adoption. I think other similarities are we're both very kind of asset heavy and capital intensive, and we all need to find ways to raise capital from scalable commercial sources if we intend to have the impact that we all desire to have at scale. But I think there are also some important differences as well. So I think first off is that we're a B2B model, not a B2C model. And typically our customers are, they're bus operators. They're much more kind of sophisticated customers with assets, revenues. They have financial statements, which are even sometimes audited, and they have access to kind of banking services. We do have an operational lease versus a capital lease. And so for us, maintaining ownership in the asset is kind of a really important part of us of kind of de-risking that technology, as well as ensuring we can kind of meet some of the ESG requirements of our investors with respect to how kind of these technologies are disposed of at the end of their life. And I think kind of this operational lease versus capital lease means that actually we don't have any receivables to sell. We basically have expected revenues from leases, similarly to like maybe how Hertz or Avis, for example, have a fleet of cars. And so you basically project revenues based on fleet of cars. Our goal is to maximize the amount of revenue due to the amount of costs associated with managing these assets. And I think finally, kind of while our assets obviously are movable, I mean, that's what they're designed to do. They are, a bit more easy to find and track than your average solar home system. And so I think what this means for us, particularly with our kind of very high touch business model, where the buses come in to be charged and serviced at properties and locations owned and managed by Basigo, it means that we have to worry a lot less about repayment risks. And similarly, if there were to be kind of, non-performing payments or non-performing assets, then finding a new customer for those devices is a lot less burdensome compared to the off-grid solar paradigm.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. Just we have time for two more quick questions. One for you, Jonathan, and then I'll have one for Krishna as well. So I'll just say both of the questions, and then if you can give me a fairly quick response, so we can move on to the final Q&A after, that'll be amazing. So, for you, Jonathan, it's just zooming in a bit on your financing journey, where you are now and where you looking to go moving forward, and what role sort of off balance sheet financing plays for you as an e-mobility company as well. And then Krishna, one last question for you is like, obviously we talked a lot about the benefits of receivables financing. Just a bit of a reflection on when you think, such deals are not the best choice, and in those sort of situations, what alternatives off-grid solar companies can also consider. So maybe Jonathan, you first, and then Krishna. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think our financing journey is probably very, very similar to many of the other companies who are, in this panel or watching on LinkedIn. And that, we have to prove our technology and business model using venture capital. If we're lucky, we can find some catalytic financing, either through grants, maybe revenue-based financing, or, in our case, we've been lucky to kind of have a very good relationship with investors like DFC and BII, who have been able to provide some fairly kind of concessional and catalytic debt. That is basically designed to kind of help businesses like ours that have high impact in terms of climate, social, and employment outcomes to get to the scale that we need to then make financing structures like these off-balance sheet structures make sense, just given the very large transaction and legal costs associated with setting them up. So yeah, our goal is to kind of get to a point where we are large enough such that we can pivot to an off-balance sheet structure. And I think the way we see this working is that we can basically have an entity that will purchase and finance our e-bus and charging assets, I think the benefit of that is obviously we can better match the type of capital that wants to invest in infrastructure versus that wants to invest in basically a software-enabled kind of high-growth VC business. And so for us, it's something that we are still very, very early in the stage of designing with our tax lawyers and financial advisors. But yeah, I think it's a key kind of, I guess, inflection point for businesses like ours to kind of really get the scale that we need to. So we're excited to start on the journey, and yeah, we're kind of keen to learn from peers what we can.
Really fascinating. Thanks, especially sort of the balancing act between sort of this more infrastructure-focused vision and the sort of more high-growth software-based solution. Thanks a lot, Jonathan. Krishna?
Yeah, where is this structure not advisable? I think it foils the same point again. If you're not large enough, please don't attempt to do a one-on-one deal. It's going to cost a lot of money and effort. What's an alternative? Go to platform aggregators. That's a developing model, and that's very, very appropriate for smaller players. Second, if the portfolio, if the companies have not yet invested or they're at a stage of growth where they either don't have adequate past history of portfolio performance, or if the portfolio is relatively new and not enough has been invested on creating the right kind of data tracking analytics portion, then again, securitization would not be advisable. It is more appropriate to look at bilateral debt deals where the portfolio monitoring is a lot more closer than what or rather it's more tailored and it is more one-on-one basis rather than securitization kind of structures where it is more systematic and standardized. So yeah, it's a question of size, your own cash flow profile, and the stage of growth at which the company is, which will determine what is the most appropriate structure of debt to target.
Thanks a lot, Krishna. And I thought, both of your perspectives were really interesting. I'm really looking forward to continue following the journeys of both Sun King and Basigo. And thanks a lot for sharing your insights with the audience. Now I'm going to be passing the mic back to my colleague Zach, who will just do a quick wrap up and maybe ask one final question that some of the panelists can also answer to. So Zach, giving the mic to you now.
Thanks. Who's still online to turn their video back on. Yeah, we didn't have many questions, so we let the discussion run a little bit longer. But thanks in particular to Jerry and Manon for hanging on. I think my my final prompt to invite everyone to give a last word is number one, if there's anything that they'd like to reflect on from other speakers. But failing that, I mean, financing is risk. The two are the same. And we've talked a lot today about risk, how it's perceived, how it's managed. So I think my final prompt as a last reflection is, where do you see the biggest gap in perception of risk and reality of risk? Identifying those potentially as the greatest underutilized spaces. I'd suggest we move forward through the order that we spoke in. So that would be Jerry, Manon, David, Jim, Harbhajan, Krishna, Jonathan, and yeah, your last words and reflections, keeping it brief because we are pretty much at time.
Yeah, so I think the biggest gap is being able to utilize data. So a number of panelists have talked about the availability of data. So with financial payments that have been made, with operations, even certain sectors like PayGo. But I think being able to draw actual insights that speak to the particular investors, and this is really just rehashing even what others have said, and translate that into capital flows to businesses, local distribution companies, smaller businesses that need this working capital. I think that's where the biggest gap is. And it's, I mean, very interesting to see how that growth has evolved in certain sectors like PayGo, but then even with other energy adjacent sectors like e-mobility. So I think with even what Nithyo is doing, primarily the mission of the company is to be able to scale or catalyze investments into companies. And a big component of that is leveraging data to provide insights to investors.
Thanks, Jerry. That's fantastic. Manon, to you.
Thank you, Zach. Yeah, I think one challenge we still have is, from our perspective, bringing this capital to the small companies. So I'm not going to be very original from the initial intervention I made earlier. But I think we've understood on this call through data, through digitalization of payments, through more legal perspectives collectively. Now we have gathered the understanding on how to bring this capital to the smaller companies through aggregation as well. But as Jim said, it's also about turning upside down some conventional approaches to financing. So I think here there is a lot to be done. Like, these webinars are great because they help to have a collective talk and to understand how to do that. And we hope with Bridging that we can bring some elements on the table that will bring down some of the complexity. And we're very happy to engage with further investor and companies. But yeah, definitely for us, the risk would be to do all these things, to do receivable financing, to do revenue-based financing, but to let them be focused on very large companies, which need this financing as well. Like, the deal of Sunking was highly needed for the industry, and it's a fantastic milestone. But let's not forget about the smaller ones as well. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Manon. David, any last words from you?
Yes. So at GreenMax, to unlock the amount of capital that is needed for cleaner, sustainable transition of energy on the continent, we believe that consumer finance is critical, will be critical. And with consumer finance, data has a huge role to play in reducing the asymmetry of information. On the continent is an informal economy. The only part of the formalization of our economy that we are seeing in the payment. How can we leverage on payment to be able to build a credit scoring model similar to what are in existence in the US, whereby as a banker, I don't need to ask to anyone 10 documents because I need to make sure that the document you are providing me, I can rely on them. How can we leverage the amount of data to build that credit scoring such that banks can comfortably use a score to provide consumer lending? And if consumers have access to finance, the upfront cost becomes a different story. So that's what we are pushing, that's what we are advocating for, and that's what we are wishing for to really catalyze the development of the continent.
Yeah, no, hugely valuable. Of course, in the absence of any data or information, yeah, is what creates the risk. And I think no doubt in terms of the direction on travel of the availability of those data in the coming years. So yeah, thank you for highlighting that so firmly. Jim, turning to you, would you like to add any final words to the discussion?
Yeah, I think one of the things that struck me on this panel, and thank you again, GSMA and Zach and George for hosting this panel. The thing that struck me was how much violent agreement there is among everybody with fairly different experiences and coming from different perspectives in terms of the importance of data, the possibilities with data in terms of the need to accommodate the meeting where investors are versus trying to bring them necessarily all to us, or the complexity of the road ahead. I think there's more that we could do perhaps in concert and I suppose I'll end it with a call to action in the sense that I think we should get together more often and see if there are ways to collaborate in the sense of how do we take what we're doing, use more common vocabulary, create more advocacy and better understanding with more traditional funders, with DFIs, with others around this emerging world of data-driven embedded finance. Clearly, off-grid solar has led the way. What can we learn from that and apply that in other markets, whether that be electric mobility or even POS systems for small merchants or even inventory financing? I think there's a lot of applicability there. So I think I would leave it with a call to action that I think we can all work together. This is the first time I've heard from a lot of the folks here on this call. The next place we go, whether that's SOCAP or here in Oslo and Catapult, or wherever it is that we find ourselves next, I would say let's get together and see if there's a very concrete way we can work together to increase the profile of this data-driven embedded finance for emerging markets. And I think if we succeed, I think the upside for all of us is that we have a chance to get more attention on this specific type of investment strategy, but also to hook it to a much bigger train that's already moving. The ship has already sailed there in terms of embedded data-driven financing.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. And yeah, no doubt that there is a missed opportunity. It's unquestionable. And the need, I think, also valuable to draw attention to the other sectors. We can fall into the trap of talking about the pay-as-you-go solar sector. But I think it's also really important to remember that it didn't exist a decade ago, and it's scaled so rapidly to provide hundreds of millions. And it still has a lot of ways to go, but we have all productive use assets are sitting there waiting for a similar treatment with a similar need. Anyway,
there's just so much more opportunity in the rest of the economy, and we all know how important access to finance is.
Yeah, no, the capital, it's hard to think of anyone in my life, certainly, or in many, where capital is not a critical enabler of building capacities, either personal or professional or within a sector. It's absolutely essential. Parvajan, turning to you, would you bring any final additions to the conversation?
I think I completely echo the sentiment that the panel is making here. I think collectively, as a participants of this entire ecosystem, not just who are present on this webinar, but many outside in the ecosystem as well, are trying to move into a space where we can understand the borrower in more detail. Can we understand their capability, their intent in much deeper ways? And can we also use a mechanism to de-risk a lot of models which were earlier considered to be very risky? I think with all of us coming together and trying to solve this, there are better ways now to fund a lot of ecosystems which were not initially considered very risky. Yeah, and I think I echo the other sentiment also. I think we should get on and discuss this more and together to understand how synergies of one can be used together to better leverage each other.
No, thank you so much. And I think echoing, David's point there, but showing that it really has application in, different markets and different focus verticals. Krishna and Jonathan, I'm going to turn to you in that order for your last remarks. Then we really must close because we've run on quite a bit. But yeah, Krishna, over to you.
Advantage of speaking last is there's not much to add. Short answer: how do you bridge the gap between perception of risk and reality of risk? Is data. The more you understand the data, the more you can solve for that gap, and that's where it lies. And all of us, companies, investors, and great enablers like Solaris and Nithyo, all of us have to work together to bridge that gap. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Krishna, and thanks also for the crisp contribution. And Jonathan, finally to you.
Well, no pressure being last, and I'll try. I guess I'll try to end on a positive note. Yeah, I guess whether our goal is obviously raise as much capital as possible to transition to the a more sustainable means of lighting our homes, powering our cars, and I think, frankly, like whether risk is real or perceived doesn't really matter that much. More in that investors and entrepreneurs really need to kind of be, I think, adherent of the factors that there will be inherent risks in all these business models, whether they're kind of established or if they are kind of new. There's going to be operational risks, finance risk, and exogenous risks. And I think we need to basically align on financing structures, particularly if they're in off-balance sheet structures, where we can align on how to kind of share risk reward as well as upside and downside, and do that kind of equitably given the risks that were all taken. And I think this is where my positive bit comes in. I think kind of data, fully agree with all the panelists that data really helps us to do that. And so it reduces information asymmetry. It helps to quantify some of the risks that we can measure. And I think it also can obviously make reducing transaction risk and cost a lot more straightforward. So hopefully it can push us all quicker to kind of make these transactions and agreements that we need to with investors.
Zach, I know you want to end this. There was a great comment from somebody in the audience, from Drew Corbin. Could we highlight what he wrote as well? He wrote, it'd be great to see all of us at the Google Forum in Nairobi in October, where receivables finance will be on the agenda, just as a note.
Yeah, fantastic. Drop the link in the comments to the event. We're beginning to lose our panelists because we have run over our allotted time. The last thing is of course just to me to say thank you everyone listening in who stayed right until the end. I really hope it's been rewarding. And thank you also to the panel for your time and really valuable contributions. It's been an absolute pleasure to have this discussion today, and all of your perspectives, I think, have really added a different emphasis, but bringing together also into quite a cohesive whole, Jim, as you noted, with how much across sectors, markets, and organizational types we're really speaking in concert. And I think there I will leave it. And yeah, say that final thank you. I hope everyone has a fabulous rest of the day.
Likewise, thank you a lot, and hope to see you soon.